you could all, I'd like to encourage everyone to participate and give forth your information, the things that in your own collections and experience present archive problems, archive triumphs. This is kind of off the, I won't say it in the depth of the meeting, but possibly one of the things we should look forward to doing is taking over the NSA archives, since they have all our pictures, telephone calls, and videos already with a lot of metadata attached. If we could just negotiate a front end, we don't have to film anymore or worry about paying for archiving. So it's just a suggestion, you keep in the back of your minds. Oh no. Oh. Please, give me a few fashion tips here. I didn't realize this was going to happen. I knew we were going to be, oh, that's right. In American posture, the way you're supposed to stand is like this all the time. And yet that goes against all aspects of modesty and decorum. Anyway, shall we get started and hope Alice catches up?
I think it would make sense to get started. Do you want me to, what order should we do? John and Gary?
He said he was going to go first, and that then I was going to, what little bit I have to offer on the table, and then you were going to take us into the far future. That's what he said.
At least the next 2 years.
Okay.
Oh, all right.
But we should let people know who's not here.
Can you?
Yes. Do you want, I'll do it, and then I'll introduce you. All right, so the past is prologue is what this roundtable is. We are a little bit short. We had our organizers were called away for family duties, and as anthropologists, kinship is still the force that holds the universe together. So Joshua Bell and John Homiak, Jake Homiak of the Smithsonian are not going to be with us. We also have a replacement for Nancy Lutkehouse. She also had a family obligation, so Gary Seaman, who's her colleague with us, and my colleague in the University of Southern California, is going to talk about the film archives as well, because he has actually worked with them. And Alice Apley from Documentary Educational Resources will be here. She's currently closing up the DER booth. So we are short, we are informal. You should interrupt us with questions or contradictions or just new ideas at any point. And John Bishop, who is right here on my right, will start us off. He has known and worked with the archive for many years, so it's an appropriate place to start. All right, John Bishop.
Thank you. Yeah. I usually lurk on the sidelines with the camera, so this is kind of a little bit different modality. A lot of what's happened in documentary film and in anthropological documentary has been little technological and conceptual moments that have led to become golden moments for the field. One of the first in the modern era was when World War II was over and there were all these 16mm cameras and projectors in surplus, and it made it possible for people to get away from the Griersonian idea of documentary being a 35mm film to the more portable and easy to use and cheaper 16mm. And I was going to be a novelist. I wrote a novel, it was terrible. And then I decided, instead of being Ernest Hemingway, I'd be Cartier-Bresson. And I got a little closer at that, but not far enough. And then my wife became interested in primatology and was going to do her dissertation in primate behavior. And you can't talk to primates, you can't interview them, and they do a lot of things very quickly. So we began exploring using film as a source of data. And this was one of those golden moments where people like Condon and Birdwhistle and, who's the man who invented proxemics? Hall, Edward Hall. They had found ways of using photographic and then film materials to do very precise analysis of micro events in conversation, shape of gatherings in spaces, the mutability of spaces. And my wife's uncle was Alan Lomax. And he was working on an analysis of gross public behavior, specifically dance, and how it could be parsed to find culturally relevant parameters. So he introduced us to all these people and all these concepts, and we were terribly excited because of the possibility of applying it to primates. My first Anthro meeting was 1969 in New Orleans, and all these people were there, and John Marshall was there with Tim Ash. They showed some Yanomamo, they showed some police tapes, some Bushman sequence tapes. It was very exciting. The next year, in 1970 in San Diego, there had just been a conference in Belmont, at the Belmont Center at the Smithsonian, in which Carl Heider, among others, was present. Everybody who was anybody or ever became anybody except me was there at that conference. And by the time they got to San Diego, there was a buzz in the air. I remember going up an escalator with one person, and they said, "Look at the dyad," and the other person, "Don't forget the triad," you know, things like that. All these coded things were being thrown around. And the program in ethnographic film was underway. Jay Ruby asked me to write a few pieces about the primate work we were going to do in Nepal in the PIEF newsletter. It was an exciting time, and that led directly to the founding of the National Anthropology Film Center, which later became the Human Studies Film Archive. And the dream came crashing down. There was a not particularly appropriate director, in person of Richard Sorensen, who didn't. Carl, can you think of a diplomatic way for me to say that? He didn't really like the anthropologists. Filmmakers would come, and he didn't want to work with them. He had a published thesis that the only way to make an accurate film was to send someone who knew nothing about anthropology and nothing about filmmaking to film some other culture. And eventually that program just kind of crashed and became the Human Studies Film Archive. I went to see Sorensen. I was so excited about filming hybrid animal husbandry in the village where we had worked in Nepal. I said, "Oh, I have this wonderful field site, and we know all the people," and he was polite. You know, he gave me a cup of coffee, and we talked about whether it was necessary to include the slates at the beginning or end of each take as part of the record, or couldn't we save some storage space by clipping them off? You know, things like that, but he was not interested. And the Human Studies Film Archive inherited Pam Wintle and Barbara Johnson, who had been working in the archive, in the center. And I didn't hear much about it for a few years, and then I got a call saying, John, do you know anyone who could possibly accession John Marshall's footage for the Smithsonian Archive? And I racked my brain and thought, you know, who could I put on this job? And I was, John, you haven't had a paying job in years. So I volunteered myself and became very involved for a period of a year, working with consolidating John's film archive and dealing with the labs and the written logs and everything that fit into it, and getting that to the Smithsonian, where it is today, one of the biggest single film collections on a single culture that exists. He says, I'm talking more than I intended. Eventually, I made other films. I did make the Himalayan film. All of my, I think almost all of my original preprint materials are at the archive. They're very well stored. There are problems with archives. One of the, here, I know what I was going to say. One of the, there were several ideas behind why you were going to have a film center, why you were going to have an archive, which is extremely expensive to maintain, especially for film. And one of them was a feeling of cultures beginning to disappear and fade away or be obliterated in other ways, and that that is, since each culture, each small development of humankind was a human achievement, was a body of knowledge embedded in a place and in a lineage, that every time one disappeared or went through a drastic change, something was lost to human memory. And one idea was to do a salvage anthropology on film that would recover aspects, it would recover certain aspects. You can't get everything, but we could build this body of film records. And it was imagined that there would be a new genre of anthropologists who would do their research on these film records, not on the, not have to find field sites. Unfortunately, that's a great job for a filmmaker, but anthropologists didn't feel that the second part was the great job for them. And nobody has gotten, there's been very little work relative to the amount of footage that was shot. I was filming doing some filming with Ted Carpenter, and Robert Gardner was in the room, and so was Lucian Taylor. And I brought this up to Bob, what happened to this idea of filming all these cultures and preserving them as collections. Well, John, I think it was a very interesting idea, but I always wanted to just go off and make another film, which is the way filmmakers think. And Lucian said something to the effect that it was a very curious idea that we would have this monde imaginaire, not of first contacts, but last contacts. And it was kind of shifting the conversation to what exactly are we doing it for? What is the concept behind it? Another aspect of why you wanted to have a film archive was that film is a very film deteriorates if it's not properly stored. And quite a bit of film had been done between World War II and this period, and some very old film, from early 1900s existed and needed to be put in proper storage and properly duplicated and made accessible. And there was this keen interest in film analysis of different levels, and there was a desire on part of some people, particularly Alan Lomax, to have a wide sample of comparable behavior that could be used in mathematical models for comparison. You guys want to interrupt me? Okay.
I have wilderness here if you would want to screen any part of wilderness.
No. The idea of documentation is the next golden moment. See, we now had this film archive. You had to go to Washington to look at the film. It would cost, if you wanted a copy, they would, if it was cleared, they could make you a copy for research purposes that you could take away, but that was quite expensive. It really precluded casual research. And I got involved with just about the time that video was coming on. That digital video and nonlinear editing completely changed the paradigm again. And I was having a meeting about archiving dance film, archiving dance, and Echo, the Butoh artist, was there, and she said how valuable archives were, that she found 3 minutes of Kosio Ono doing a performance early in his career, and how precious it was, and how it filled her with such joy to see these 3 minutes of Kosio Ono. She said, of course, if it had been 3 hours, it would not have been so thrilling. And I always that kind of took that away as we were preparing to do digital coverage, gavel to gavel on things. And a couple of years after that, I was taking students to the Pacific Arts Festival in Samoa, and we brought 6 cameras, and we're going to do gavel to gavel of every stage. There were 4 stages, plus all these other special events. And I got there, and at least 6 folklorists, dance ethnographers, and anthropologists that I knew personally had their cameras up on a tripod, not paying attention to the camera or the dance, but it was for their record, and they would bring back more hours than they could physically. It's like Tristram Shandy. It takes it takes a week to write 1 day's journal, and pretty soon it's thousands of days behind. And I have friends, you know, I go into their studio and they'll open a door and there'll be 1,000 little mini DV cassettes, all labeled. And, you know, at some point, it's an overwhelming amount of information. And I don't really have any solution. I'm the person that generates the stuff. I don't really have a particularly good philosophical solution to how we should approach handling it. Would someone else care to step in?
Yes,
Thank you. Oh.
Alice, I can set while you introduce your talk. John, I'm gonna sit there quickly. This doesn't have an HDMI. I thought you said it was HDMI. It's not HDMI.
I didn't tell them, I didn't know we were going to.
I'm gonna pop it on mine.
But-
Okay, I'll just pop it on mine.
I'm sorry, we evidently do have a. This is Alice Apley from Documentary Educational Resources.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, the timing of this was terrible. I had a vendor booth, which was supposed to be closed at 5, and I started cleaning up at 3 in order to be here, but I did my best.
Give me a second with your slides.
Okay.
Yeah, is there anyone, does anyone have anything to say about this subject? Because I think it's really something we need to discuss more than to be lectured on. Because every one of us who deals with these materials generates archival stuff and faces the problem of what to do with it. And I'd like to hear, yes. Okay, that's, okay. I just did, not just, I did 2 years of field recording for the Library of Congress and Smithsonian of oral histories of the Civil Rights Movement. And they decided they wanted to videotape them as part of the museum collection. And it was completely digital origination. And the Library of Congress transcribed everything from those 100 interviews and gave DVDs back to the people who were interviewed and a transcript to the people, and has put every single interview in its entirety up on their website. So that's if you have the resources, that's what you can do now, which you would. That's Born Digital. It's likely that because of the cost, the film, which is preserved at a certain temperature and humidity, might as well be put in a pyramid as funerary goods. Because at present, well, one of the first difficulties was, you have film, what do you do with it? For a while, it was being taken, a print was taken on an inexpensive telecine, projected into a camera and recorded on 3/4 inch on tape. And many of the films that are shown in colleges that were originally film prints are now shown on copies of those. That was fine if you wanted to do some research you take it away. It was a way to take it away from the archive. Then, for a cost of only about $250 an hour, and it takes about 3 hours to do 1 hour, so $750 an hour, you could have it put on analog 1-inch tape. And I spent many thousands of dollars doing that. And now it doesn't look as nice as it would if it had been done to high-def tape. High-def means scanning it without color correcting and a whole lot of post-producing after it's scanned, and that's pretty much the standard that's being used now. It's extremely expensive, and consequently, you either have to have someone paying for it or some protocol in place to prioritize what's going to get transferred first. You know, if you have 25 minutes of someone in New Guinea and 500 hours of Bushmen, do we have to do all the Bushmen first, or do we, I'm not in on that decision making, but that's pretty much what you're up against. Yeah, Carl.
Is there a central listing of archives in this country or in the world? Because, for example, my little University of South Carolina has an archive, and I've put a lot of my stuff in there. I know Bob Gardner put his New Guinea materials into the Harvard archive, and I put my New Guinea materials into the Harvard archive.
Yeah.
But I haven't looked up. Does every university have an archive? Are those archives at all satisfactory, or
Well, there's a difference between whether it's an archive or a repository in some sense, that any library can take a collection. The Peabody Museum and this is possibly the Film Studies Center or the Peabody Museum, I'm not sure which. They had vast collections of nitrate negatives and things like that. And because Bob was a very powerful and influential person, he kept upgrading the way his stuff was copied. but the only two that I know of in the States, in the US, that are doing active archiving are the Smithsonian and the Library of Congress that have collections like ours, that they're actively have a digitization program.
Well, look, if the University of South Carolina is doing it, there must be a lot of other universities.
Yeah, Carl, come up and, oh, no. Yeah.
Where is this written down? I'm just saying,
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't have any idea of what the state of our. No, but we have a separate, like the film archive. Yeah. Probably, you're asking to find out. You're anthropology librarian,
Yeah, yeah. I know there's the UCLA Film Archive. That's mostly devoted to feature film, theatrical film. Yeah. And USC has an archive, and
Every place has a bunch of junk lying around. The question has it been digitized and indexed and put somewhere where it's reasonably stable? But should we be knowing about this and putting a list together and urging people to do something up to a certain standard?
yes, and I think one of the things that our association could do is to give more guidelines to the collections at the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian as for priorities and the type of indexing and metadata and all that's required to make it accessible.
Do you mean the SVA?
The SVA is possibly the cornerstone, but the AAA also has an interest in it. Other archives like the Institute for Scientific Film in Germany, they shut down their archive and dispersed the materials to a more general archive and cut back the ease of accessing it. That's Göttingen, yeah, IWF. Okay. You're making me depressed because not only do you digitize things, but all the types of materials that you might digitize them to, like CDs, DVDs, hard drives, they become obsolete rapidly. One of the golden moments for anthropological film was the DVD, where you not only could make a very nice and clean copy of the film, you could put a subtitle track on it that could be turned on and off. You could put additional films, backup films. You could put text. You could contextualize the film right there in the single piece of plastic that held the thing. And that's disappearing because of the online streaming and everything being centrally located. I've looked into a number of things that I was very enthusiastic about and called everybody about, and things like tape that was actually photographic. It put digital information on a photographic S-star base. Kodak invented it. and it cost $100 for a USB drive, and it would hold 2 terabytes or 1 terabyte or something. And you could keep it, you didn't have to put it in a vault. Well, the patent's there. There's a company that wants to develop it, but they haven't gotten the money to develop it. And then if they do it, someone else is going to come up with one that will store 3 terabytes but uses a different machine altogether. That's the I just had to change my computer. None of the footage I shot with the GoPro will now play on my new computer. I have to go back several steps and use all kinds of trickery to get digital stuff shot 2 years ago that I can even edit now. So digital sounds like a magic thing. We're going to digitize. I think one of the things the museums will have to do is tell Apple that we love their mice and the fact that you can pinch the screen and everything, but we also need, stable.
This question is not completely off the subject. What's happened to Gregory Bateson's work from Bali?
And that's at the Library of Congress. And someone, I don't remember their name, did a big, I think a book about it. He was studying the photographic record from the Bali project. Still photographs. I think, I don't know what's happened to the film. I know it's at the Library of Congress. If someone wants to do it, they can then ask the Library of Congress for it, and they'll put it to the top of the queue if they have someone who specifically wants to work with that footage. When he worked from prints. They made copies of prints. They didn't digitize the still negatives, and so he worked with the subset. He didn't work with the full 10,000 or whatever images that Mead and Bateson collected. Jenny, could you speak to a little bit about the problems of metadata and organizing collections, or whatever you want to talk about?
I'm happy to, but it seems that maybe you should start, because the order as far as, because Alice is the transition between the past and the future in the now.
Okay, yeah, I can start, and hopefully the images will catch up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about really the intersection or the way in which DER has worked with the Human Studies Film Archive, a bit about our history, and the work that we do around archiving and preservation. So just for those who don't know, a little quick history lesson. DER was founded in 1968 by John Marshall and Timothy Ash. It was originally called the Center for Documentary Anthropology. It was incorporated as a nonprofit in 1971 as Documentary Educational Research, and then with Documentary Educational Resources, the name was adopted in 72. DER served as the production space and distribution company for Marshall and Ash, and they were building on really the early work done by Tim related to the Netzlich films and Man, A Course of Study, as well as the work John was doing on the Kung. And DER became a place for developing these new films and styles of filmmaking, and served as a hub for other like-minded filmmakers. The reason for getting into distribution, as far as I understand it, and I'm open to feedback from people who maybe were part of that history, was that the short films that they were distributing, and they wanted to distribute them to schools, this was really something that the then existing distribution companies didn't know how to handle and kind of properly monetize these short films. And so then they took on distribution of other projects. The Alaska films by Sarah Elder and Lenny Kamerling were the next big collection they took on, and and now we have, 900 titles or so. But the relationship of the HSFA and DER has been one of an intertwined history. I don't know if if John talked at all about the Belmont Conference, but John Marshall and Timothy Ash were at, he didn't? Okay, so in 1970, at the Belmont Conference was when a group of visual anthropologists came together and hashed out some of the ideas for the archive, and Carl was one of the people present, so I'm going to let him fill in details as the discussion continues. But both John and Tim were there, and when the HSFA was opened, the Kung films and the Yanomamo films were among the founding collection.
I'll find it. Yeah, we'll get it, don't worry.
Okay, so now, in addition to the Kung and Yanomamo films, there are about 25 different collections or individual films that we share, that DER, or that the Human Studies Film Archive does the work of preservation, and DER does the work of maintaining access. But the truth is that those two roles are a little more complicated than it at first sounds. And some of that is just simply in terms of we both are constantly fielding inquiries from researchers, from educators, from people wanting to do screenings, to do retrospectives, et cetera, and kind of pass things back and forth between us. So one of the first things I wanted to say, and this was something that came up at the I started listening to some of the Belmont Conference tapes in preparation for this, and at one point in the discussion of whether this new archive that was being created should just take on the films for which they were going to do extensive metadata tagging and archival work, or if it should also be simply a storage or a repository for other films. And Tim Ash said, and there was some question about, well, what does that cost? And Tim Ash kind of jumped in and said, well, I can tell you exactly what that costs, because we have 2 million feet of film in a storage facility in Cambridge called Metropolitan Storage. And I have a beautiful slideshow of images of Metropolitan Storage. And it costs $12 a month. And it's 50 degrees Fahrenheit and 50% humidity. And yes, it's not sort of regulated and maintained, but they have these brick walls that are this thick, and that's it's a vault and steel doors, and the temperature, is more or less maintained. And that, in fact, has served as DER's vault for 40 years or so. And still hoping I'll get a picture of it. So I think that in sort of along the lines of marking this 40th anniversary of the HSFA and the sort of changes that are going on in archiving and ethnographic film that we're talking about, one of the milestones for DER is that in the last 2 years, we took on the job of emptying out our vault, because we realized that 40 years, or 50 degrees more or less, and 50% humidity more or less was fine for a long time, but it was now time to move the rest of these materials to proper storage facilities or preservation facilities. And over the years, we had accumulated a number of different projects and materials. So this work has entailed going through and, I'm blanking on the word, making lists of all of the different materials were there and making a plan for where they should go. So for instance, John Marshall had shot the 1976 Folklife Festival on the Mall for the Folklife Festival, and so those materials were moved to the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. The film, all of the film materials for his works, Vermont Kids and If It Fits, which are these two New England projects, were moved to the Harvard Film Archive. There were additional Yanomamo materials that had not previously been sent to the Smithsonian. We sent those to the HSFA. It took us about a year and a half to empty it out, and we now have in our office about a wall worth of miscellaneous materials, and if anybody has any guesses, I don't have the list with me, but we are looking for people who can read over the list of names and mysterious words on the films to figure out who they belong to. But unbeknownst to us, yay. Okay. Oh, look at that. Ha. So quickly, that was just intro. This is a list of our shared projects, which goes off the list because it's long. This is proper storage at the Smithsonian. That's Pam Wintle, who's the archivist there. This is Metropolitan Storage in Cambridge. You can see it's pretty massive. This was the signature card of Lorna Marshall, who opened the vault account. The interior, the door. These are some, what it looked like when we started the project. This is a close-up. This is staff and intern. This is towards the end of the project. Those boxes are because things are now being boxed up to be shipped off. Some of our detective tools for trying to figure out what things are. And this is the box that went off to the Folklife Center. And this is the empty storage space. So unbeknownst to us, we did this just in time because this fall, Metropolitan Storage announced after 121 years in business that they would be closing because MIT was who was the owner of the building for the last 40-something years, was turning it into some kind of student facility space. So not only will our materials now be better looked after, but we were able to do it in a thoughtful and deliberate way instead of needing to, get out in 2 months, which is what I think happened to a lot of people. So I think that, storage facilities shouldn't be taken for granted. They're important. So one of the things that we're also seeing, and one of the projects that has also been in here for 30 years or so, are the film materials for the Faces of Change series, which was a National Science Foundation funded series done in the 70s. Norman Miller was the producer, and Norman's the one with the headlamp on, and that's Kevin, who was one of our DR staff at the time. And they're moving the Faces of Change materials into Norman's vehicle because coinciding with our emptying out the vault, he actually had gotten a small amount of money together to retransfer the materials. And we are seeing more and more filmmakers going back and retransferring and re-releasing the material. So I just wanted to share a couple of images just so you can see some of the work that's being done. Yeah? Last year? Yeah. So this is an image from, so the Faces of Change, just very quickly, was designed as a comparative approach to anthropology and in the observational film moment. So the idea is that 5 different filmmaker anthropologist teams went to 5 different places on the planet. Each set out to document or to make a short film, one about the economy, one about women's roles, one about development, et cetera, 5 topics. And then students could not only have this sort of empirical experience of the culture through these observational films, but also could compare from one culture to another. So this is a shot from the China series, from Three Island Women is the name of this film. And just to give you a sense, these were transferred, and my technical knowledge, ends soon after what I'm going to share with you, and I can defer to other people beyond that. So these were transferred from CRI, the color reversal intermediary, or the interpositive. And I want to make sure that I'm on the right page. And this is the before. This is what we had been distributing, and I should say we're now in sort of the home stretch of getting these out on DVD. And so this is, you can see the difference. I'll do before and after. So this was a retransferred from the CRI. Now this was not, the CRI is not going back to the original, or it's not the most ideal transfer process. And this is, again, where I start losing it, technically. And it really comes down to how much money you have to do the transfer process. But still, you can see there's a big improvement. And then here's another shot. This was what we've been distributing. And it's, you know what, this screen doesn't really do justice to it. But the colors are a lot richer, et cetera. And then in one case, for spirit possession, we couldn't find the CRI, so we actually went back to the single-strand positive, which is a better source. It required a lot more work and more money, but you can see this is the opening shot from what we had been distributing. Oops, sorry. This is the new post-retransfer. And I should say also, and it's hard to see on this, the earlier shots from China, the China series, in addition to being retransferred, they've been color corrected. These haven't been color corrected yet, though this one looks very good, but you can see the difference here. This is another shot from the same film, the spirit possession film. The quality of the master or the source material was much better, but you can see here that this has not yet been color corrected. The red is way too red. There's still work to be done. But you give a little bit of sense of what it looks like when we do this work. So I think part of my intention in sharing this is just that one of the great things about the material being available and in storage is that we are able to take advantage of improved technologies and re-release the films and make them available in better quality for people to see. Yep, and so there are a number of other films that have been doing this that we've been releasing. In addition to, so now we've basically divested ourselves of all of our film materials with the exception of sort of these random materials. And now we're looking at our tape library because for the films that were made, you know, in a video era, and even possibly some cases of films that were shot on film for which no one has saved the original film, the tape master may be the best copy that's around. So we're very interested now in preserving the tape masters, which requires a whole digitization process. We did a small fundraising campaign just within our board and some close friends of DER so that we would have resources or the technology in-house that we can transfer and up-res some of our materials, but we don't have the capacity to do the enormous number of tapes that we have. So that's going to involve a much more extensive project and funding in order to do that. But the tapes also, there's wear and tear on the tapes, and we're very conscious that if we, you know, every time we go back to the tape master, whether it's to send something out for screening, to remaster a DVD, or to send something for a streaming platform, we're potentially damaging the tape. So we'd like to be able to digitize all of those, have a digital backup, as well as use the digital materials as the preservation, or as both the preservation master, but also as our working materials. So that's sort of where we're at in terms of that. remember if I had anything else. So I'm very interested in talking also about sort of the future of ethnographic film, and I think, and of archiving, because I think the two are very interrelated, because at the heart, a lot of the issues around the changing technology are shaping how we're going to think about both of those things. But I'm going to leave that to Jenny to raise those issues, and then hopefully we can discuss. Okay.
I'm just very quickly going to, I'm sitting in for Nancy Lutkehouse, who is at USC, and I'm there too. My name is Gary Seaman. I was involved in bringing Tim Ash to USC in the decade before he died. And in about 1992, he started getting ill. And we had been together working, trying to develop a prototype for using various Yanomamo film materials, most of which were just being distributed in film format at that time. And so we got the work prints of the Yanomamo material, which was 30 some odd hours, I've forgotten what it was, and a 16 millimeter projector with a little LED capture device. We put those onto Super VHS video. We used a program in those days which was the state of the art called HyperCard, and we basically transferred the film notes that he and Chagnon had put together looking at these rushes of the films. We put those onto the cards, and we connected those, linked those to an in-out point to an individual HyperCard that had the appropriate note of content. I guess they're calling that metadata these days. These notes were then connected through a digital interface to the film footage. Tim died in 1994, and I appealed to Napoleon Chagnon for us to continue this work. And we did finish one, what I would call hypermedia product from that. It was called Yanomamo Interactive, The Axe Fight, which was ironically used by Tierney when he deconstructed Chagnon's interpretation of the axe fight in Darkness and El Dorado. But that was one of its virtues because, among other things, you could discover in the footage by using the interactive interface, you could discover that there was a parallel axe fight going on in the background among women, which had not been previously remarked, and which Chagnon literally was totally unconscious of, even though he had probably seen this footage dozens of times. So it had, as I see it, great virtues to be able to have access to this material that I'm not sure that we otherwise would have had, but that Tim had had it put in the Smithsonian before he left for Australia, as his prospects here in the United States did not appear to be good in the early 80s. So anyway, the other project, also I'm sort of inadvertently becoming sort of Tim's amanuensis. I have also was contacted last year, or 2 years ago now, by Michael McDonald, who was the unborn son of a family that Tim visited up in Nova Scotia in the 1950s and 60s, made a little film about it, and shot a lot of black and white still material, which he also deposited in the Smithsonian. And Michael McDonald and I are now working to take this material, the little black and white film footage, which is what we have. There may be more in the Smithsonian, about 15 minutes, a little black and white edited silent film that Tim made on the family in about 1961 or 2. And we've already put the film onto DVDs that he's distributed to his family. There were 11 in the family, sons of the man who hosted, or the family that hosted Tim and later Patsy. So that's also available because they were put into the film archives at the Smithsonian, and they're still bearing fruit 20 years after Tim's death, which is, I'm sure, wherever he is, he would appreciate that. He had the foresight to put them away in a safe place, except for the flood that they had in the basement, which is where the films were stored. But I guess it got past that. Actually, we'd already done it by then, so we had the copies at USC. That's my only connection with the Smithsonian.
All right. So, thank you, Gary. I will segue, use Tim as kind of a segue because, as Alice indicated when she threw it to me, I'm mostly going to talk about the future, not just of the Human Studies Film Archive, but even of this idea of preserving the legacy of ethnographic film. But I'm somewhat a barbarian at the gates because I'll just explain that by first starting with just a recap of how I see what the original purpose and the original sort of paradigm in which the Film Studies Archive was founded is very different from today. The three purposes of which I understand in terms of archiving this was a style of shooting and this looking at filmed cultural behavior. So film as a research modality rather than simply this representation, rather than I present my findings as a film. In fact, film is a research method to watch, and as John started us off with, things like the study of proxemics, to do a videotape and then analyze that data, stuff that is much more currently done not within anthropology, but in perhaps visual sociology. Since the interpretive turn in anthropology, this has not been the model for cultural anthropology, not the most common, and not gain ground. But that was one idea. Another idea was actually one in which I was trained with Tim, would sort of be the segue in terms of event sequence filming. And Tim would have been really thrilled about the discovery of the axe fight, because he would always tell us, as I was a student of his at USC, to film so that somebody else could use your footage. Don't just go in there and film with an idea of, like, which is standard practice in documentary, especially what they call the run and gun. Just go in there, get shot with your story in mind. Don't shoot like that. That's not ethnographic film. And in fact, shoot whole events, you know, like Carl Heider's idea of whole bodies, whole persons, whole events, to look for sort of natural acts, but also film them in a way that other people could find other things in them. Those two, which I understand is the original sort of guiding presence of the archive, and also the fact that there existed people like Tim Ash and John Marshall, and then later, Prelorin, and then McDougall, these great men, or in case of David and Judith, men and women team, but these were people who were working at a time when it was possible to have such a large body of work be singular. And I think that a lot has changed since that origin of the film archive. The first, as I alluded to, is that this kind of observational cultural behavior is no longer the main mode of cultural anthropology. In fact, the identification with as social science is quite on the wane. Surprising, it might be surprising to some people, but there are whole departments in which I've talked to people and they don't identify with doing social science. This interpretive turn is rather different. There have been some wonderful things that came out of that original vision. I think the main one that John has a film called In the Wilderness of a Troubled Genre, which is about our troubled genre of ethnographic film, which showcases one prime example, Aaron Glass's work of people whose ancestors were filmed in these original films, coming back to the archives to learn and see how things that have been forgotten were done. So that repatriation of the archives is, I think, probably the greatest success, even though it wasn't necessarily the intended, I guess it was part of the intended vision in terms of this idea of salvaging disappearing cultures. And that would be a context in which salvage anthropology, which at least in my experience is often used as a denigrating thing, actually is really recuperated as a positive thing. People going in there and remembering things, and also being able to use it in a totally different way, as in, seeing the kinship and, oh, that's grandpa, and what have you. My interest is I see that a need to preserve the continuity, I guess I would call it the branding of ethnographic film, because we, as a group, or as a marginal space within a discipline, or as I say, we've managed to remain experimental for 100 years. We don't want to be victims of our popularity in a way. I think the culture concept, we have lost it to the greater world because of its success. Next, ethnography, everyone talks about it outside and beyond. And right now, our lunch is being eaten by all these other scholarly disciplines that are just now discovering alternative forms of scholarly publication, which they call media, and oftentimes is, film plus all this other stuff. So for me, that is really important, that part of the continuity. And as barbaric as it might seem, the sort of things I will suggest, they're actually about preserving that legacy and growing it in an age that's very different from the conditions in which the film archive was started. And I would see sort of the differences. Where did I list the differences? They were just here a minute ago. Okay, let me see if I can remember them. Yeah. There used to be a time of scarcity. It was so expensive to produce even 16mm film. Finished production costs in the early 80s, $1,000 per minute minimum for your final film. So a 30-minute black and white sync sound 16mm film, about $30,000 from, to finish. So there was a scarcity. We now live in an era of superabundance. On the production end, everybody can make films. You have Final Cut, digital camera, you've got a whole studio on your desktop. That same superabundance is mirrored on the flip side, production and consumption, and also multiple channels of distribution. We used to have this idea of expertise. It was these great men, these singular artists, versus now, I would say, the prosumer. Everybody's making media. It used to be institutional supports. Because it was expensive, people needed the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian, Werner Grand. They needed grants to fund it. And now it's less expensive and also much more distributed. And I think this is the reason that I was invited to speak on the panel, was that I have been working on this question of how does a genre that developed in the 20th century in a system of craft production, institutional support, how is it going to survive in this more fluid, decentralized, and individualized media ecology, where anybody can make films, and many people are. We don't necessarily look to, even I, I did my undergraduate, my master's, and my PhD all in anthropology, have never directly used the material in the film archives. A lot because I was at USC where we had these films, but even today when I want to show them, I show them through Alexander Spreet's licensing because they're streaming. It's a database that our library pays a great deal of money to, and who knows how long they're going to want to subscribe to this, but it's somebody else, a middleman is making a profit off this stuff that is in the Library of Congress. So that's a kind of a tricky situation, and my vision, I'll just to be quick and take some, just to sum it up, so we leave some time for discussion, is that the actual, I mean, it sort of speaks to Dr. Hyder's question in terms of, is there an index of all the archives? And for me, it's not so much a question of preserving, which is very expensive work requiring professionals to actually preserve, whether it's the celluloid film or God help you if you're trying to preserve digital, but in any case, to preserve the footage itself, it's not just the technical difficulties, there are legal licensing difficulties, formatting difficulties, there's a whole bunch of stuff that prevents you from even dreaming that. But what about just a list, what I call the article that I think is why Jake and Josh invited me to be on this roundtable was called Gardening Metadata in the New Media Ecology, a manifesto of sorts for ethnographic film, and this idea that we don't need an instant archive that serves everything online, that kind of vision of perfection that a lot of the large commercial media companies are working on, and it costs a lot. And we couldn't do it even with all the resources we could muster, but instead create something that I had written of as a cross between the Internet Movie Database, which everybody who's in there entered themselves into or hired PAs to enter them into, and Wikipedia, this idea of people putting their own stuff up and saying, this is an ethnographic film, and giving us all the information about it, the metadata, who made it, how long, what have you, and if it is available, where to get it, so that we can collect this and let it be, this is the sort of the barbarian part, it's not about archiving the works of the greats, but it's about becoming a repository so people can search for things and find them and know they exist. And yes, right away, the first question is always, what about the gatekeeper? You mean anybody can say their film is ethnographic? And those things, there is a way of working them out in this, the generation and the background that I'm coming from is open source, folksonomies. You can have a repository like this that people individually contribute to, rating system. There are plenty of ways in which to vet and have reputation so people can be discerning about them. But the first idea and the reason to spread it is to make it bottom up, is in order to, otherwise it's too vast a job. But just to sort of have this kind of a switchboard, I have been working on this, and I did get a grant, which I actually then we went back and turned down because they wanted explicitly to make it documentary media, and I felt really strongly about this, what people now call branding issue, that ethnographic film is big enough. If you open it to all documentary, why stop there, right? Because what counts as documentary? But around this idea of this sort of this nucleus of ethnographic, which is nebulous enough as a nucleus goes, but around that idea to create some sort of what I was thinking as, I called it, Cinepedia Ethnographicus, like just play off Wikipedia so that people could enter their stuff and we could know, because the one huge limitation in terms of this, even doing the best one can for the Human Studies Film Archive, is I don't see how it can grow. Like, even just taking care of the slow burn world where stuff was accumulating, I don't know, it took John Marshall 50 years to accumulate 1 million feet, and that was pretty fast-paced to do it. And now it's just outpaced that because all of our undergraduates are shooting stuff on their iPhone. And so to me, it's not that's an important job, but in terms of planning for the future, this idea of metadata is much more important than figuring out what happens with the bits or the celluloid, because in my mind, if it's out there, if it can be pirated, the more people know about it, that's really the secret to preserving it. Somebody having it, I've got it on a zip drive in my garage. Whereas the people who are really, really tight, like I think, I don't think it bodes well for Robert Drew's films because he's really tight with all of his films, and everything has the watermark on it, and even on BitTorrent, it's quite hard to find his stuff. And I love his work, and I feel that that's very sad. So I'm pirating it. No, but I mean, it's very sad. The more closed you are, the more likely it is not to be preserved for the future. And the more dispersed and open it is, it becomes, you know, invincible, like a cockroach. It'll appear from everywhere. So that is sort of my take on where to go in terms of just having a central repository so that we can at least grow, and not to infect and pollute the world of stuff that is precious and old, but to try and make some bridge between that and some continuity of branding and recognition, which I guess it's much more heterodox what I'm suggesting, and it will be offensive to some people, but I guess I would just urge that you could always put a filter. And if we build such a database that's open, you know, has open calls and is definitely open source so that anybody can use this metadata content, and in putting it up there, you know that in making an entry and creating an entry for your film with your film description, all of that data is no longer your, you know, which is pretty normal, actually. That's the one thing in a capitalist economy, that marketing material is free. You can certainly disseminate our own marketing material about our film. So that would be my hope, and I would be interested in thoughts of, you know, partnership, or whether, you know, what's might be good about that idea, or what are some pitfalls I might not have thought about, because, as I said, we had to turn down this grant that wanted to kind of do it for documentary because it was from a organization that wasn't affiliated with anthropology, and we just had to say we still right now want to take a go and focus on ethnographic and having a place for new works, because actually that's what I will conclude with in this idea of archiving and its importance, even for new works, even for works that might only have really small marginal audiences and not necessarily these classics like Bob Gardner's work or John Marshall's work or Tim Ash's work. I teach in a Master's of Visual, a new one-year master's program, which is really organized for this digital ecology that I was talking about. And over the last 6 years, 43 films have been produced by our students. They all want to be, you know, not all, but a large majority have gone on to work in production. Only one of these 43 films is in distribution. That is really a waste. It's a crime. Even the most, there are some that are really wonderful, but I would say even the most average of them has an audience to which they will not make it. And that seems to me quite against the spirit of the academy. Any master's thesis that's typed and written, automatically, master's and doctoral dissertations automatically go into ProQuest and become published and become accessible and part of the record. That isn't the case in any ethnographic film program that I know of, and in fact, I've even consulted with some new programs that thought that it was fine to accept final work on DVDs. No, that's definitely not fine. But even, like, this work is getting lost simultaneously because the students don't know what to do with it, and also the university. When I went to our library and we asked our librarian, he suggested Alexander Street, which is, again, a commercial company, and why should we license it when the university and the student already have the copyright? So that's sort of why I'm worried about the future is already becoming the past so quickly. Yes? We don't have an archive of that type. There's no budget for that. When we asked the library, that's what, I mean, that's a great idea. No, it's not a difficulty issue, though, but it's a funding issue, I would imagine, or an infrastructural issue. I mean, definitely, I've been looking for over a year now who is thinking about it, including talking to the people. There are some new innovative doctoral programs at the cinema school where doctoral theses are made in formats that can include film and such. But those are actually, I know that they're not well archived because links that I was sent for projects that are only 2 years old are gone. So in fact, the Human Studies Film Archive is much more has greater longevity than any of these newfangled formats, where maybe their mind is so in the new that the archiving, I don't know. It's not a difficulty issue. It's a cultural, there is some kind of a cultural magic words that I would love to know. I don't know. So. I'm not talking about streaming the bits, because that is complex and bandwidth. I mean, there are lots of costs. I mean, millions and millions couldn't actually even do it. I'm talking about maybe a much smaller amount, like $50,000 grant would be plenty to get up and running something where people, where the main thing would be building it, very cheap, off-the-shelf projects, open source software, and then the larger portion, probably 2 or 3 times what was spent on building it, or maybe 3 or 4 on marketing it, so that, I mean, that's a terrible word, but what's the outreach? Yeah, that's the community word. Outreach to people to say, hey, this is here if you have a film that you want to enter it in, and people would. That's this idea of making it grassroots. People would say, hey, I did a film for, and I'll put it in there. How do we get it? Because my students, a lot of them want to do big stuff with it. They get caught up in the world, or they say, oh, I'm going to do it on Vimeo, and they don't understand that Vimeo is a platform. It's not distribution. There's no one going to be repping, marketing, sending out postcards, mailers, and that kind of stuff. There are some other ways, and there's a streaming distributor called Canopy. Anyone out here? Yeah. And what's your thoughts on them?
They're great. A couple of them came to give us a presentation last year at Gainesville. They're great Aussie accents, very friendly, and they work with you to produce videos if you want for your in-house, which we didn't necessarily need. They have a nice set of collections. They have new ways of financing it. Now there's PDA where we put the entire Criterion collection in our library catalog, but until it's viewed a third time, we're not purchasing it.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the year, we have money left to not negotiate purchases and things. It's a very easy to use platform, and they're very young, and they're very eager to work with individual universities, libraries, to subsidize things.
What do they go?
Canopy with a K.
So we're like all thumbs up. We have Alexander Street Press as well. And there's a website by Indiana University, University of Michigan called PEIA, PEIA, which is video, ethnographic video instruction and research. And it's get permission from them or they'll do it. It's raw video footage by anthropologists. And theoretically, with some notes by the anthropologists about what it is, but I'm kind of disappointed in how much effort some of the people put towards the context visualizing. There's not a whole lot, and most of it is more kind of ethnographic or ethnomusicology. There's like a lot of dance, instrumentation. Again, it's slowly being built. But it's PEIA. You could look it up. Ethnographic video instruction and research or something along those lines.
I think it might be, the A might be archive. Oh. And the other thing about Evaya is, I think one of the things they're working towards is some kind of annotation tool for annotating the actual footage and, in the context of the footage. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, wow. Yeah, thank you. Well, that's if even the Europeans are having trouble with it, then it's a real problem. I mean, usually because of the greater public funding for infrastructure, but that would be. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, send me an email. I have one. It's about 2 years old, but yes, I mean, I had to make one for my students. Yeah. Yes, absolutely, and that is exactly the idea of collecting as much as possible. Have no gate, let it flood, let in all of the peasants and barbarians and my people. And you can always do what the reason I'm sort of a convert is I was against it, and when Wikipedia first started, I was like, oh my God, such a horrible technocratic dream, as if like perfection and knowledge could be reached by like just sort of aggregating, and if everybody, with all the eyes in the world will reach truth, right? And all Sarah Palin's, I don't know if you know that story about how there was some fact she got wrong and her advocates just went in and changed Wikipedia to reflect what she said. So I was a little bit horrified at this idea that there could be some universal knowledge, but they caught up with the sort of ethnographic mindset, and within about 4 or 5 years, they had more rigorous committees and editors, and now they really recognize that knowledge just doesn't amass atom by atom into, suddenly, a large molecule of truth. In fact, it needs to be tended, and knowledge for whom. So that would be, just to create the database, and then we could go forth and say, okay, we now have a jury that's very selective that will, tell us which films have got the good housekeeping or good ethnographic seal or what have you. All of those can be added later as layers. And this, I don't know if that was clear, and we're not talking about the streaming, it's just kind of like an exchange of information, and let everybody be entered into the record, because we have massively powerful search tools for text. That is actually, older than I am, 50 years of text searching, more than 50 years of text searching. And that, I think, is the way to go. Certain things that are missing from even the most elaborate database that are really relevant to a faculty, I need a film on this, and this, less than 20 minutes. Right? Very difficult to find. And there are a lot of really interesting initiatives from our friends who study films, kind of going backward from the idea of event sequence filming or finding little clips from the stuff the shorts that Marshall and Ash both did, and sort of putting raw footage of something, okay, this is just how to make a basket, how to tie a sari, that kind of stuff. There's sort of the reverse going on now in sort of the film studies of instructors going and looking at something like Weissman's work and saying, okay, this scene of the preparation of the corpse intercutting with the guy before he's dead, that's a great example, and making a clip of that. So they're kind of going backwards into whole works and pulling out the clips. But all of that stuff requires tremendous investment of clip-making tools and time code and stuff that, yeah, it's all there, but it's just too, it's too perfect. It's kind of like a perfection that will tank the project from ever happening. So that's why I had called it in my article, the dream of the imperfect archive, where we could just keep making it better, always knowing that it'll have problems. But I guess that's the end. I think that's exactly right, and that's, I think that we could have a way that would serve both rather different needs. In fact, even such a higgledy-piggledy, hodgepodge kind of database, kind of almost a Tower of Babel, we could also say, and by the way, this stuff that's entered here is at the Library of Congress. So people could go backwards from the first pass, which is always a Google search, and the more there's the adjunctification of instruction, the less people have at their disposal any kind of institutional resource. They're hired 2 weeks before before the class starts. They're going to go online. And there's amazing stuff online in terms of National Film Board of Canada has most of, I guess it's not, things from starting in 1965, most of the docs produced after 65 are already there to view. Beautiful quality. I'm glad as their, poor neighbors to the south, we can still use their tax dollars, and they haven't put up any bandwidth firewalls or, to keep us out of that. Television, like NHK, and in Germany, WDR Broadcasting, they've made they are the ones who have, that's how I sort of have an idea of the cost and expense of it, because they're trying to do that with their large content libraries, and are still, have succeeded in large part, but it's taken about a decade and billions of dollars. So that's sort of what gave me like this sort of second best thing. So we're almost out, I think, of time. We still have some time for questions, or are there anyone up on the other panelists want to?
I know that whenever you start dealing with a large body of film footage or video footage, one of the biggest issues is indexing and logging. And you can put clips up on YouTube, but if you don't have a finder's guide, for example, Alan Lomax's archives have almost all the video and film footage that was shot for his television work and films that he made in the past. I did a film, Land Where the Blues Began, and much to my surprise, every shot I took is up on YouTube, but there's no finder's guide. If you know a particular artist, or you look for Levy Camp or something like that, you can find it on YouTube, but it's, as Jenny said, it is a platform. It doesn't constitute an accessible body of work. So I think what Jenny is saying about finding this way to make this open access bottom-up database is crucial.
And any thoughts on who might fund such a thing? You were telling me that you don't think the NSF would.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good point.
Well, Facebook is supposedly storing every photograph and video forever, and they're running into a problem that as things get older, they're accessed less and less, but their promise is they're going to keep it. So they're trying to get a tiered long-term storage so that you might be able to pull up something, but it might take 20 minutes for the disk to spin up or an hour to get it from a more remote and deeper part of the storage. Some of the things that the Human Studies Film Archive has of mine are the photographs from this Nepalese village. And we've been going through all these ethical things about, do we put pictures of people up on the website without permission and all this. They're now showing up on Facebook from the prints that I gave people. So, so you know, this is what Jenny was talking about in the sense that, you know, we can have our top-down hierarchies, but these visual materials also have a way of bubbling up.
All right, should we call it happy hour?
Coming out of this with any specific plans to set up a committee to explore this?
That would be great.
Yeah, anyone,
Yeah?
yeah, I think it's time for people a lot younger than me to figure out what this next iteration is going to be. And since there's so much enthusiasm for creating the media and so much enthusiasm for exchanging media in different platforms, I think another kind of set of meetings and consolidation of enthusiasm would take us a long way. But it's not going to come from me, unfortunately.
Well, I am working, as I said, currently on the grant for this, which now we have gone back to the drawing board because I didn't necessarily know how important it was for me for it to be focused on ethnographic film and really connected with anthropology, because already that is big enough. And but I would love to know of partners to identify and have some, definitely some advisors, because I've come and even though we didn't have the organizers of this panel, Jake and Josh here, I sort of, in reading the notes and preparing for this, and even talking with Alice at DER, understood that they are allies and related interests, but theirs is not the same. I mean, this would not, what I'm suggesting comes from the heart of people making and using, not from an institution like the Smithsonian, and not necessarily in the core practice of DER, but definitely related. Like DER would, of course, figure out some way to port their stuff into this so that they could be visible. And that's why the marketing part actually has to be so much, because and now is a good time for that. The marketing part has to be there, so that's top of mind. Just like you think like, oh, I could look this up in Wikipedia, oh, I could look this up in the ethnographic Wikipedia. That's really the mind share, and just knowing that it's there. So your question is a great one in terms of, I mean, if there's anybody here who is positioned to advise on it, we would love to do that. I don't know that Jake, we haven't talked to them about this, but it seems like that's not, it can't start from there.
I think they have some constraints because of being the Smithsonian. DER doesn't, and we've talked about it. I mean, we would be interested in working on it. It's just figuring out logistics.
Yeah.
And I think DER films we'd want to participate in that way, but it's also, there might be some way in which this could help to expand the service that DER provides to this community.
Yeah.
But I think funding is a crucial factor,
Yeah.
time and funding.
Well,
No.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
but it's a highly searchable database, and yeah,
Yeah.
and you know we.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great.
And, yeah, Jenny, we actually have moved forward in that we have created a a template for a database using PB Core, and, you know, it's pretty well researched, and we've had archivists work on it. We're just, you know, lacking the money to implement it.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that would be
It's
great.
huge. Mm-hmm.
But it can even start without that. I mean, just like, I mean, the one that I had proposed and built a prototype just using Wikimedia, which is the exact same software that Wikipedia runs on, and people can, you know, we could certainly suggest a template, but the openness of that is part of its value. And then the search and anything more complicated in terms of putting more powerful searches would be built atop this the initial thing is to get something up, so yeah, people can just start submitting the way they do for the IMDb. Yeah, that's exactly it. Okay, well, we're at our time, so thank you guys for coming, being patient with our various technical issues. No.
Right.
Can I suggest that you take the lead and run a thing at the Visual Anthropological Conference next year in Minneapolis, and you publicize it between now and next November, and get some very specific ideas about how to roll forward. And then the year after, it'll be in Washington DC, which may be an ideal place to really get something going. I think if you just walk out of this room now, as important as the things you already, you've got in your head, told us, but they'll be frittered away.
Story of my life. Yeah, that's definitely something to think about. I don't know that I can right now commit to it, because I'd love to talk some more about what you have in mind.
No, but we're on the brink of getting a number of very specific kinds of ideas. And I think if you kept the momentum going that you and others have started tonight,
Well, what if we do this? I mean, you're already working on this.
I am.
Whether or not it happens at a session a year from now, or just whoever's interested, we talk and figure out what next steps are, and then decide what, you know.
But before I would unveil it, and we should, there's not something for a committee discussion like that. I would want to have a prototype, because it's not, you know, that's the only thing.
Okay, it's just. I don't think it's not happening. I mean, Jenny and I have actually talked about this before. It's ongoing. She's been working on funding. I think if people who are interested express their interest, then this is something that, to Jenny,
I'm definitely open to what you say, but when I say yes, I really mean it, so I don't say yes so fast. You know, so, but, because I think that something can be done before then as far as making a better prototype. And this is really something to show rather than talk about, because part of the proliferation is nobody has a common vocabulary, and it can be just like a rugby scrum.
someone's got to do something. I'll tell you, before most of you were coming to AAA, I started something called FAT, Films for Anthropological Teaching. I did 8 editions of this, and it got really fat. And no one wanted to touch it anymore. And it's now,
is too big.
what? We tried, and we went to. Yeah, we tried, but
Uno said that it was part of the AAA, and we couldn't publish it digitally, because she thought that she held the copyright. She said, we have to go back and check and see who had the copyright. And that, it all got kind of funky. But I actually had 3 computer scientists and funding to actually turn it into a database. And AAA wouldn't release it.
Yeah. I mean, that is one, this is,
that we should not try to do a 9th edition of that and not see.
there's a better model than doing that.
build something that's what you're talking, exactly what you're talking about, is transfer all that information from that into that.
Well, I think one of the things that happened with the 50 years ago, 40 years ago, was that there was a tremendous effort put forward by anthropologists in this organization to set this entity up within the government. Then it happened, and our organization started losing connection with it. I don't know if I would hope it would be possible to incorporate the holdings of the Human Studies Film Archive and be part of a head end to that collection, which is quite significant, as well as looking at this as a way of enfolding the work that's being done now, and that got. Yes.
Yeah.
But the. Mhm. But also this metadata also is relevant to accessing and knowing what's available in various American and world archives, since the subject matter is that wide.
Well, I definitely, something could be done that would take advantage of the Visual Research Conference, which, as you have pointed out, is a great, what do they call them, venue setting in which to workshop stuff. It's really what a conference should be much more like, I think. So I definitely think that we could commit to doing something there, but I would hope that it would be more figured out before there, so that people there are just saying, oh yeah, I like this, but a little higher, or what about adding this? Rather, as barbarian as I am, design is not to be done by committee. Feedback is to be done by committee.
The only way that
But
8 editions of fact happened was because I did it
Yes.
in my department, and it was just a nightmare, but I was willing to do that, and nobody else until the very end, Carol Herman, until the very end, when the department at the University of Washington, and who chair at the time, put up money to hire 2 undergraduates to do type stuff. Anyway, I would just hope that we leave this room with some very specific plans, and something very specific will happen.
And we can't leave till then?
Oh no.
Because my dinner folks my batteries are dying. But what you've said is really heartening. I mean, it's like, because I had hoped that by publishing, I see how foolishly idealistic I am. I had hoped that by publishing that in American Anthropologist, which John and Naomi, when they were editing the visual editors for American Anthropologist, that the mere publication of the article would draw people who were interested in that. And there even is the URL to invite people to go to the stupid little prototype I set up.
Nobody ever helped me.
Yeah.
No.
Nobody even came and put up just like some funny film or enter, Deep Throat, ha.
But definitely you should find go back. I don't remember which issue it was in, but just in the last 2 or 3 years, 2 years.
Yeah. Or email me. I have PDFs and so few publications. No. But I am working on this. Right now, and I guess the specific thing I would say, come up to me when Carl lets us leave, and I will love to hear if you're interested and have ideas. I mean, definitely, I'm going to come. Nora, right? Yeah, I will come talk to Nora. I would think like, okay, suddenly she made me think like, okay, if the Europeans don't have this yet, maybe we can,
it,
And that, you know,
Yeah.
I don't like it either, and after,
Yeah.
you know, after this many years of teaching, you see that every film, no matter what you think of it, no matter whatever its issues are, has an audience for whom that's like, I never knew there was a film about weekend feminists in the 1980s.
Yeah,
Exactly.
right, yeah.
I would say that shows you what culture is, because it's not technical, and it's not just the expense, right? It can be done. The fact that when people create a degree program, and this, you know, as far as one of the reasons that visual anthropology has remained marginal despite our giant SVA and all these ways in which we're clearly not marginal, these are the sort of ways in which it is, because there wasn't an automatic, oh, we'll create this program, and then, okay, how do we archive? If these are scholarly publications, how do we archive them? So, I mean, and this is, many people have talked about this in Picturing Culture and Jay Ruby, just the failure of complete institutionalization, which might also be our greatest virtue as well. But this part, the cataloging part, the metadata part, it is time to solve that. And is that specific enough? That we definitely will do something, and I'd love to, you know, to talk with you about what you think of.
Can,
You
yeah, he doesn't want to, yeah. But here, can I say something? First of all, I think that things can be done before a year from now.
Yes.
Also, I don't think that necessarily coming together in a year as a committee to design the database is the effective thing to do. However, I do think, because DR has thought about doing things like this, one of the really crucial things is funding, because really hammering out those details, you know, it's just a matter of sitting down and doing it. It's about having the funding to have the time and the expertise to do it. Having collaborators, having a coalition, having partners across the US, having international partners, that might make it fundable to be able to demonstrate, look, it's not just Jenny or it's not just DER who thinks that this would be valuable, but, you know, there's 3, you know, strong visual anthropology programs in the US and 3 abroad who, you know, are all, you know, chomping at the bit to upload information about films and to do outreach to the community. Then it starts to become a fundable project, or at least it's something that hopefully one could reach out. So that's what I think would be the valuable things to be working on, building. And I'm not sure, in a year from now, you know, do we need to wait a year to talk about that? Or perhaps it's about, yeah, well, perhaps in a year it's about just simply giving an update or of where it might be.
Well, I suggest,
Anyhow. What? Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah.
I
Sounds
entered
good.
data about my films into the test data, the test thing.
I'm
Sounds good.
sorry, I forgot. When I say no one, I mean fewer than I wanted. No. Not yet. Not yet. I mean, when I talk about the, whatever, you know, the resources, it's tough. I don't have I mean, I look for a job every year. I mean, not literally, but the precarious, I don't have the kind of institutional base in which these things are typically come out of. That's just the way it is these days. So I wrote the article hoping that the Rolling Stone could gather some moss.
Which,
What? I don't think it's a matter of refuse. By talking to them, I found that it wasn't even on their horizon. I mean, that their quickest answer was to go to Alexander Street, made me know right away. I wasn't talking to the right person.
right.
But maybe we could start with everyone putting their film into this and get the, you know. And then you have an investment, and then you can tell your friends, and they'll want to be on the same thing, and it builds a network as well as a network of people as well as a network of information.
Yeah, yeah, I could totally even just, I don't even know, I mean, yeah, you could even just email me that information. I have to see if it's still up, and I can't get online in this room for some reason. But definitely I could pass around the sign-up sheet and send you the, because it's a long URL. Really, it is cide.ethnographic.us, because I thought that was funny. Yeah, that's probably true. I love Excel. Yeah, well, what I built it in is Wikimedia, which is not robust, but it's more searchable. I mean, these are just PHP templates. It's not an actual database, which that would be a great place to get to. But it's fine. I mean, it's fine enough to. I would like to put in a little bit more work before opening it up to this part, because I said it was just more than, you know, not even shoestring, dental floss, but that wouldn't take any, you know, very difficult.
Well, I really think because DER has looked into developing its own database, and with ideas that, you know, on the one hand, we'd love to have a database that just is more robust about the films that we distribute, but that designing it, it could be something that is both user-generated and could be open to additional titles beyond the ones we distribute. We've already developed a template of what the fields could be with assistance of an archivist. We've talked to other archivists and people who've developed databases. It really comes down to finding some funding to have the time and the money, because it's really that simple. And that's why I say the first step might be just simply building some kind of, you know, collaborative group or, you know, partners. And doing, you know, if you have some leads for funding and talking about what other funding, I think the nitty-gritty, also from what archivists have told me, is just start building it. I mean, don't do it completely willy-nilly, but you can start building something, and you can always make it more sophisticated. It's not that hard to extract the data if it's put in there in a relatively clean way, and put it into something that's, you know, more complex. You know, so that's the easy part. It really is time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks everyone for
Yes,
coming.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.